It was the worst day of my life. I had thought it was supposed to be a day of celebration, my 50th birthday, but instead it became the day everything I had known and trusted shattered before my eyes. I stood frozen in our bedroom, my hands gripping the doorframe. Paul, my husband of 25 years, was methodically packing his suitcase as though he was simply going on a trip for a few days. But this wasn't a vacation. It wasn't just a few days apart. This was him leaving me for a woman half my age, a woman who apparently understood him in ways I never could. "Paul, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible, trembling. "It's my birthday. Can we talk about this?" He didn't even look up at me as he folded his shirts with such cold precision. "There's nothing to talk about, Laura. I'm done. I'm 55, you're 50. Let's face it, you're just too old for me now." His words cut through me like a knife, each syllable deeper than the last. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I'd always known things weren't perfect between us lately. He had been distant, coming home late, his mind always somewhere else. But I never imagined it was because he was planning on leaving me for someone else, someone younger, someone he thought could offer him something I could not. Paul kept folding his clothes, not even glancing at me, though I stood there feeling as if my heart was shattering. His words still echoed in my mind, as if I were hearing the sound of thunder reverberating in my head. I couldn't accept this truth. "Paul, please, don't do this," I said, unable to hide the tremor in my voice. "You're leaving me for a girl who's 25 years younger than me?" He paused for a moment, then turned to face me, his eyes as cold as ice. "She's not just young, Laura. She's everything I need. She doesn't question me about every decision. She doesn't need me to take care of everything. I don't find anything interesting about you anymore. You've let everything slip through your fingers. So I'm not good enough for you anymore? Everything I've done for you means nothing," I shouted, no longer able to hold it in. "Don't you remember the years I've been here supporting you from when we were struggling to when you got everything you wanted?" Paul laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I had once loved. It wasn't the warmth I had seen in his eyes when we were a happy couple. "What about you? Do you remember? You're just focused on your work, on the parties and events you organize. You're not the woman I fell in love with anymore." "Is that so?" I said, my voice bitter. "You want me to be the woman who stays home, always looking after you, living in your shadow, right? Am I just a tool for you to feel free and secure in your life?" Paul looked at me coldly, as if I was nothing but a burden. "No, Laura. You're not you anymore. You lost yourself in your work, in what you thought was important. But Amanda, she makes me feel alive again. She makes me feel loved and needed." Anger flared up inside me, and I stepped closer, looking him straight in the eye. "Then go. You can go with her, live the life you think you deserve. But never tell me that I'm not good enough. I'm not the weak woman you can leave behind." Paul smirked, and I saw something cruel in that smile. "You'll be fine, Laura. You'll always find a way. You'll soon realize you don't need me anymore." "Yes, I will be fine," I said, my voice firm, though my heart was more broken than ever. "But you will regret it, Paul. You will regret what you've done to me." As he zipped up his suitcase, I stood there watching the man I had built a life with walk out of the door without a second glance. "I've already filed the divorce papers," he said, his voice flat. "You must have noticed how bored I've been lately." And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes? Hours? It felt like time had stopped entirely. My entire world had crumbled, and all I could do was stare at the empty space where Paul had been. I had given everything to this marriage, everything to him. And now, at 50, I was left with nothing but memories, and the sinking realization that I wasn't enough for him. The days after Paul left were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My body felt like a shell, and my heart, broken and bruised, felt like it was no longer mine. I'd spent 25 years of my life building a home, a family, a future with Paul, and now I was alone. I hardly recognized myself. I had lost 15 pounds in the span of a few weeks. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't concentrate on anything. The quiet of the house was deafening, the memories of our life together haunting every corner. My best friend Sarah practically moved in with me. She had lost her own husband to cancer 2 years ago, so she understood grief in ways no one else could. But at least Michael didn't choose to leave her. "At least he didn't leave you for someone younger," Sarah said, her voice thick with anger every time Paul's name came up. She was right. There was a unique kind of pain in being discarded, in knowing that I had not been enough, that I was no longer worth his time. That feeling haunted me more than anything else. The divorce was brutal. Paul's lawyer, aggressive and ruthless, argued that since I let myself go and focused too much on my career, I didn't deserve my fair share of our assets. It didn't matter that I had supported Paul through his early career struggles, or that my event planning business had helped put us through the lean years. All that mattered was that I was past my prime. I learned in horrifying detail that Paul had been planning this for months. He had moved money around, documented every flaw he could find in our marriage, even started a private Instagram account to showcase his life with Amanda, a life I hadn't even known existed. The betrayal of it all cut deep, and with each new revelation, I felt myself fall deeper into a hole I wasn't sure I could climb out of. The weight of the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't escape the flood of images that flooded my mind. Paul's secret Instagram account, his carefully curated life with Amanda, the lavish dinners, the expensive trips. I had been left in the dark, oblivious to the fact that my husband was living a double life. The betrayal was suffocating. Every piece of information felt like a jagged shard of glass digging deeper into my chest. I was furious, yes, but there was also something else stirring within me, something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. A voice, quiet at first, but growing louder with each passing day. Why had I allowed this to happen? Why had I put myself second for so long, always prioritizing Paul's career, his happiness, his life? I had given him everything, and yet he had walked away without a second thought. How had I gotten here? I paced around the house, the familiar rooms now filled with echoes of what once was, the kitchen where we had hosted dinner parties, the living room where we had spent endless hours talking about our future. The empty walls seemed to mock me, reminding me of all the years I had spent building a life with someone who never truly valued me. But then there it was again. That voice, the one that had been so quiet, so hidden under the weight of my responsibilities, was now growing stronger. What about me? What about my life? I stopped in front of the mirror in our bedroom, looking at the woman staring back at me. I didn't recognize her. I hadn't looked at myself in weeks, maybe months, too consumed with the fallout of Paul's betrayal to care about anything else. But now I really looked. I saw the dark circles under my eyes, the weight I had lost without even noticing, the hollow look that had taken residence in my once bright eyes. But underneath that, underneath all the pain and sorrow, I saw something else. There was a fire still smoldering there, a glimmer of who I used to be. A woman who was strong, independent, and capable. I remembered her now. She wasn't gone. She was just buried. I couldn't stay like this. I couldn't let myself drown in the shame and anger that Paul's actions had caused. If I didn't start thinking about myself, I would lose everything. Not just him, but my own sense of self-worth. I could feel the tension in my chest ease slightly as I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit here, consumed by anger or sorrow anymore. I wasn't going to let Paul's choices dictate how I felt about myself. I need to rebuild. I need to find myself again, for me. I went into the kitchen and grabbed my phone. It was time to do something for me. For once, I would put myself first. I texted Sarah to meet me for coffee, then I called my lawyer. I needed to take control, to reclaim the life that Paul had tried to steal from me. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I wasn't sure what my future would look like, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be a victim of this. Not anymore. I walked to my closet and started picking out clothes, each piece a small declaration of independence. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to live for me. And if that meant starting over from scratch, then so be it. I deserve more than this. I deserve happiness. I didn't know where the road would lead, but at least now, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But then something changed. 3 months after Paul left, I was sorting through some old photos, trying to decide which ones to keep, when I stumbled across our wedding album. There we were, young, hopeful, in love. And as I stared at the picture of us, the contrast between that bright-eyed bride and the woman I had become hit me like a ton of bricks. But instead of breaking down, instead of crying, something else rose up inside me. Anger, and with it, a spark of determination. I called Martha, one of my most successful clients, who had been asking me to take on a bigger role in her corporate events company. I had always declined in the past, not wanting to take on more work that would take me away from Paul. But now, in the wake of everything, it felt like the only option. Martha, about that position we discussed, is it still available? I asked, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Laura, yes, absolutely. But it would mean managing our West Coast expansion. You'd need to travel a lot and rebuild our client base there from scratch. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm not just ready, Martha, I said, looking around my empty house, the life I had built around Paul now gone. I need this. And just like that, my life began to shift. I threw myself into fitness, started making plans for my future, and redefined my identity. My wardrobe changed. I began to dress for myself, not for anyone else. I took control of my life. And as I began to rebuild, something inside me started to heal. It was then that I ran into Amanda's mother, Susan, at the grocery store. Susan had been my yoga instructor before Amanda started dating Paul. She looked at me with a mix of pity and concern as she approached me. Laura, I'm so sorry about everything, she said, her hand resting on my arm. I had no idea Amanda was seeing a married man until it was too late. I forced a smile, gripping my shopping cart a little tighter. How are they doing? I asked, trying to sound casual, even though the words felt bitter coming out of my mouth. Susan hesitated, then leaned in closer. Honestly, not great. Paul's been controlling. Tamahi. He tracks Amanda's spending, criticizes her friends, gets jealous when she talks to men her age. Last week, he threw a fit because she wanted to go to a music festival instead of some business dinner. The information hit me differently than I had expected. Instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of validation. The perfect Instagram life they'd been showcasing hadn't been the whole story. That must be hard for you to watch, I said, carefully watching her face cloud with worry. It is, Susan said, but what's worse is watching him blow through money trying to keep up with her lifestyle. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, weekend trips. Amanda mentioned he's been dipping into his retirement savings. The weight of her words was heavy, but strangely empowering. I remembered how my lawyer had discovered Paul's hidden assets during the divorce, and how he had raged at the court ruling in my favor. It was official. I was no longer the woman Paul had discarded. I wasn't the one left behind, waiting for him to regret his choices. I was thriving. I was reborn. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even Amanda, take that from me. As the weeks went by, I noticed something odd. Despite all the material things that Paul had been lavishing on Amanda, something wasn't right. Paul, the man who had always prided himself on his control, seemed to be slipping. Amanda, who had once seemed like the perfect solution to all of Paul's problems, was now causing him more stress than he could handle. At first, I had been too absorbed in my own journey of healing to pay much attention. But Sarah, always so observant, pointed it out during one of our late-night chats. I think Amanda's starting to drive him crazy, Sarah said, stirring her wine thoughtfully. I mean, Paul's always been about appearances, but Amanda, she's a bit much for him, isn't she? I had noticed it too, but I hadn't wanted to admit it. I had been too focused on my own life, building my career, rebuilding my self-esteem. But Sarah's words planted a seed of curiosity, and soon enough, I started paying closer attention to the subtle signs. Amanda had always been demanding, wanting more expensive gifts, more extravagant dates, and more attention. At first, it was all fun for Paul. He was the center of her universe, indulging in a relationship where he didn't have to feel his age, where he could feel young and desired again. But now I started to hear through mutual friends, and even from some of the same people who had once supported Paul, that things were starting to unravel. One evening, while I was at an industry gala, I saw them together. They didn't notice me at first, and I was glad for that. I was already a little tired of seeing them flaunt their perfect lives. But the more I watched, the more I realized something wasn't right. Amanda was speaking loudly about a new designer bag she wanted. Paul, visibly frustrated, was shaking his head, his usual charm gone. He looked tired, defeated even, and his words were sharp. I've already bought you enough things, Amanda. You don't need another damn bag, Paul snapped, his voice low but harsh. Amanda, for the first time, didn't smile. She looked around the room, seemingly embarrassed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Paul, do you have any idea how much I spend to keep up with this lifestyle you've introduced me to? And all I hear from you is no. You promised me luxury, remember? I could see the tension between them. the awkwardness that had started to replace the carefree joy they once shared. The more they interacted, the more Paul seemed to retreat into himself. He looked worn out, exhausted. The next few weeks were filled with tension. Paul became quieter, and the calls between him and Amanda were filled with more and more arguments. She was demanding, wanting more than he could give. She wasn't content with just a few designer clothes or expensive dinners anymore. She wanted a life that was beyond his reach, a life that Paul wasn't sure he could provide without draining every last penny of his savings. One night, while I was enjoying a quiet dinner at home, I received a text from Sarah. Bartum. I heard Paul and Amanda had a huge blowout tonight. He's at the bar looking completely defeated. He's just been buying everything she wants, and now she's pissed because he's not giving her enough. She doesn't care about him, she just wants the money. I think he's finally realizing it. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. The woman Paul had left me for, the one he thought would be the perfect partner, was now the source of his frustration. His idea of a fresh start had turned into a nightmare, and I could see it clearly now. Amanda wasn't what he thought she was, and the illusion he had created around her was crumbling. But then came the final straw. A month later, I received a message from a mutual acquaintance, someone who used to be part of our social circle. Acquaintance. Laura, I don't know if you've heard, but Paul and Amanda are done. They broke up. She left him last night. It was a huge mess, lots of yelling, lots of accusations. Apparently, Amanda got into some trouble with her spending habits, and Paul couldn't keep up anymore. He's devastated, but I think he's secretly relieved. The message hit me with an odd sense of relief mixed with something else, a strange sense of closure. Paul had been chasing after something he could never truly have, someone who would keep him young, someone who would make him feel desirable. But Amanda had wanted more than he could give, and it had all come crashing down. A few days later, I ran into Paul at a local coffee shop. He didn't notice me at first, his face tired, worn. When he looked up and saw me, he froze. There was a moment of silence before he stood up and walked over to my table. Laura, he said, his voice almost a whisper, I didn't think I'd see you again. I studied him for a moment. He looked different, older, more broken. The confident man who had once left me standing in our bedroom was no longer there. Instead, there was a man who had lost everything, who had tried to outrun time, only to find that he couldn't. How's Amanda? I asked, the words leaving my lips before I could stop them. He looked down, a brief flicker of shame crossing his face. She left me. She was only interested in the lifestyle, Laura. I didn't see it. I thought it was everything I needed, but she just wanted my money. She didn't care about me. There was a long pause. I had to bite back a laugh. It was strange hearing him finally admit it, hearing him come to terms with the reality of his own choices. Do you regret it? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. He met my gaze, his eyes softening. Every day. I stayed silent for a moment. The satisfaction of his regret was not what I had imagined. It didn't bring me the closure I thought it would. It wasn't the victory I had once hoped for. Instead, it was just a sad reminder of the man I had once loved, and the man who had chosen someone else. You should have thought about it sooner, Paul, I said quietly, but I'm glad you finally see the truth. He nodded, his face flushed with regret. I'm sorry, Laura, I truly am. I stood up, looking at him one last time. There was no bitterness left in me, just a quiet acceptance. He wasn't the man I had once loved, and the life I had wanted with him was long gone. Goodbye, Paul. And with that, I walked away, knowing that my life was no longer tied to his. It was mine to rebuild, and I was finally ready to embrace that future. It had been 3 months since Paul left, and I'd become someone I didn't even recognize in the best possible way. I had spent too many years living in the shadows of someone else's needs and expectations. Now I was stepping into the light, reclaiming who I was. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. I walked into the gala, my heart no longer burdened by the weight of my past. The glimmer of pride that had grown in me since I had taken control of my life shimmered brighter than the expensive chandeliers overhead. There I was, the woman I had always wanted to be, confident, self-assured, radiant. And yet, when I walked past Paul and Amanda, I couldn't help but notice the way Paul's eyes followed me. It wasn't the same look he had once given me, that familiar warmth that used to fill me with love and security. No, this look was different. It was a mixture of shock, regret, and something I couldn't quite place. He was staring at me as if I had just walked into the room from another life, which in a way I had. I had come from a place of quiet despair to one of unapologetic self-love, and he had no place in it anymore. Barron leaned in, noticing what I had already seen. He can't take his eyes off you, Laura. He thought you were a story from the past, but now you're a success story he'll never get to have. I could barely suppress a smile. She was right, of course. He thought he could replace me with someone younger, someone who could somehow fulfill the idea of youth he was chasing. But here I was, standing in front of him, a reminder of everything he had let slip through his fingers. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a message from him. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't let it show. It was a simple text, filled with regret, the kind I had expected but never needed. Son of Paul, beside, you look stunning tonight. I miss our conversations. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? I stared at the text, feeling a twinge of something that wasn't anger, but something like a quiet release. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who begged for crumbs of affection, the one who wondered if she could win him back. No, I'd already moved on. With a swift motion, I deleted the message. There was no need to revisit that chapter of my life. Paul could continue to wallow in his regrets. I had no room for them. A year later, I stood on stage, my heart swelling with pride as I received an award for my achievements in the event planning industry. The deep blue gown I wore shimmered under the lights, a symbol of everything I had built. My voice, steady and unwavering, filled the room as I spoke to the crowd. Laura, life isn't just about success in business. It's about finding yourself when you face the unexpected. When someone tells you that you're too old, it's just an opportunity to be reborn, to start again. The applause that followed was thunderous, and I couldn't help but notice Paul in the crowd. His eyes were fixed on me, and in them, I saw nothing but regret. Amanda had left him. His life, once full of promises and new beginnings, had fallen apart. But I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had taken control of my own future and had become a symbol of hope for others. I had created a network to support women over 50, helping them rediscover their potential and reignite their careers. I wasn't just a successful professional now. I was an advocate for all those who thought their best years were behind them. Peter, you're a role model for everyone, Laura. You've proven that the only truth is, life doesn't end when you turn 50. It's just the beginning. I smiled, my heart full of confidence. I wasn't just someone who had succeeded in my career. I had become the woman I had always wanted to be. Independent, free, and no longer waiting for anyone's approval to feel worthy. I stepped outside into the sunlight, my mind clear and my heart open. I knew that my life had only just begun. There was so much more ahead of me, so many chapters still to be written. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had found my strength, my freedom, and I would never go back to the woman who had allowed someone else to define her. This was my journey, and it was just the beginning. I thank you for following Laura's story. This story is not just about recovering from a broken marriage, but also about the journey of finding oneself. Laura overcame the pain, found her strength, and embraced the freedom she truly deserved. But we'd love to hear your thoughts. 1. What do you think of Laura's transformation? Do you feel inspired by her recovery journey? 2. If you were Laura, what would you have done in her situation? Do you believe you could find yourself and move on after such a big loss? 3. Do you think age is really a barrier to achieving dreams and success? Has this story changed the way you think about life after 50? We'd love to hear your thoughts and insights. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you think about this story. Together we can learn and share wonderful values from each person's journey.